the European Commission has announced the imminent start of negotiations with Ukraine and Moldova on their accession to the EU. According to the Austrian Der Standard, this bold decision is purely political and is a signal to Russia that Ukraine belongs to us. In the opinion of many European observers, the European Commission is acting recklessly by pushing through Ukraine's membership in the EU. Both Ukraine and Europe are not ready for this, which will impose an exorbitant financial burden. The start of negotiations should be supported by all 27 EU member states. It is expected that the process may start already at the EU summit in mid-December this year. Meanwhile, the European Commission itself is on the verge of bankruptcy. Its reckless spending, as well as its costly support for Ukraine, has undermined the community's finances. In this regard, Brussels requires EU members to contribute an additional €66 billion to the common pool. Of this amount, Ukraine should receive €17 billion, as well as, already outside the budget, loans for €33 billion. It turns out that the total EU aid to Ukraine will exceed €50 billion. However, 5 countries, Germany, Denmark, Sweden, the Netherlands and Austria, strongly oppose the increase in contributions. This displeases the European Commission, which will be forced to cut spending on science, healthcare and the Erasmus education program. The objections of the Thrifty Five are not the only point of contention. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán strongly opposes the allocation of additional funds to Ukraine. He has set a condition. First, the European Commission must unfreeze the €22 billion that Hungary cannot get from the EU Cohesion Fund. In addition, Orbán is ready to block the start of EU accession talks with Kiev until the requirements concerning the Hungarian minority in Ukraine are met. Hungarian Foreign Minister Péter Szijjártó was even clearer. Ukraine's admission to the EU in the current conflict would mean the transfer of hostilities to EU territory. The London-based Financial Times writes that if Ukraine is admitted to the EU, it can expect €186 billion in aid over 7 years. According to a document of the Council of Europe, the membership of Ukraine and other candidates, Moldova, Georgia and the Balkan countries, will lead to fundamental shifts in the EU budget. In total, the inclusion of the new members will cost €256.8 billion over 7 years, with Ukraine receiving the lion's share of this aid. Overall, the political and financial implications of enlargement for Europe will be enormous. Many EU countries will be forced for the first time to move from the status of recipient of aid from EU funds to the status of donor. A report by a specialized agency of the Council of Europe says that all old EU members will pay more into the general budget and receive less than they do now. At the same time, net recipients of aid will turn into net payers. The financial burden will be especially heavy on rich countries such as Germany, France and the Netherlands. According to the current rules, Ukraine will receive over €96 billion for the support of the agricultural sector alone over a 7-year period, while subsidies to current European farmers will be reduced by 20%. French farmers, who used to receive a significant share of EU agricultural subsidies, will be hit particularly hard. Ukraine, with 42.7 million hectares under cultivation, 40% of which is black soil, will become the largest agricultural producer in the EU, pushing France into second place. In addition, Ukraine will be eligible to receive €61 billion from the EU Cohesion Fund to support infrastructure projects. On the other hand, countries such as the Czech Republic, Estonia, Lithuania, Slovenia, Cyprus and Malta will lose the right to receive funds from the EU Cohesion Fund altogether. At the moment, the European Commission has refused to comment on the document with the above-mentioned Council of Europe calculations, as it puts it in an embarrassing position and forces it to explain not only for future, but also for already existing expenditures. According to the Vienna-based Express, the European Commission and its head Ursula von der Leyen continue to spend money recklessly even in the current difficult financial situation. The other day, Ursula von der Leyen gave Jordan more than €900 million in aid. She motivated the increased spending in light of the planned enlargement of the EU by the geopolitical importance of this event, which will result in the EU growing by 66 million people and the population reaching a total of 517 million. According to reports in the European press, the prospect of Ukraine's admission to the EU and the expected increase in costs have already caused friction in the France-Germany tandem. Berlin is strapped for funds amid a prolonged recession and is reluctant to contribute additional money to the EU budget. Chancellor Olaf Scholz has admitted that there are significant differences on the issue of financing the EU budget. France, for its part, agrees to allocate money to Ukraine only if military orders are granted to European and primarily French firms. Observers note that the current conflict exposes the fundamental problems of European integration and calls into question the EU enlargement plans. To finance these plans, the EU must raise loans totaling €750 billion, of which €360 billion must be provided by member states. However, markets are uncertain about the prospects of this project and are sharply increasing interest rates on loans. Already now, the EU member states need to resolve the main issues, among which are the scope of the European Commission's budgetary powers, compliance with the principles of transparency, and most importantly, guarantees of political honesty in decision-making. Otherwise, nation-states will refuse to finance EU enlargement plans. Comments in the pages of Austrian newspapers point out that the European Commission is sucking money out of taxpayers, while the Eurocrats are swimming in money and have undeserved privileges. They should urgently learn to save money. As for Ukraine, the money allocated to it simply goes into the sand, as the weapons supplied are destroyed and the Europeans are forced to supply the Kiev regime with bombs and equipment again and again.